In this episode of The Dispatch, we open a book. We read words. We look at diagrams. We flip pages. And we're subject to many advertisements. But wait, there's more. After all that, when we're confused and befuddled by all those words, we take a look at an accessory for the Model T engine that promises wine, bread, and virgins in this world. We don't even have to wait for the afterlife. And it gets better. You don't have to see my ugly mug. Nope, not even once. This episode of The Dispatch is certified 100% wrinkle-free. Hi, I'm Stephen from Flivver Channel, and welcome to The Dispatch. Today, we're going to be taking a look at this book, the original book of the Ford. How to get the best out of a Ford car or van. This book was recommended to me by Mark Osterman from New York State, good friend of mine. Mark drives his T as an everyday daily driver, and he likes to look after it using traditional methods and tools. He recommended this book to me for anyone who's like-minded. This particular copy was a gift from my brother-in-law, and it is much appreciated. It was published by Temple Press in London, England, UK, and it was published, I'm guessing, around 1926 or 27. I'll explain why I'm guessing at that in a moment. But just as a quick intro, you'll find that this book first has a number of adverts. We'll take a closer look at some of these later. Then we get this page. How Ford owners can get the best out of their cars, vans, or trucks. An indispensable handbook on the care, upkeep, repair, and adjustment of Ford cars. Now here's the reason I think that this must have been published around 26 or 27. Since this book is meant to be contemporaneous with the cars that it's talking about, and the fact that that right there is a improved Ford runabout, 1926 or 27. So that's how I kind of zeroed in on the publication date best I could. Cover page here, the original book of the Ford, showing how Ford owners can get the best out of their cars, vans, or trucks. It was authored by R.T. NICHOLSON, M.A., and this is the 10th and revised edition. We'll take a look at a few of the chapters in this dispatch. Be sure to let me know in the comments if you like this sort of book review so I could do more, and definitely tell me if you want to see more of this book. I'm only going to show a couple of chapters and a few other highlights in this dispatch, but if you'd like to see more of this book, I can do more videos like this. Let me read for you the preface. I am proud of the continued success of this book. The 9th edition is exhausted and a 10th is called for. Though the current Ford model has to some extent been redesigned, I have decided to keep its predecessor mainly in view in this 10th edition, because most Ford owners are, by the nature of the case, drivers of the older type of car, and the interests of the majority must be considered. Owners of the latest models will find the new points covered in a special opening section. In point of fact, the present model Ford, while it embodies many welcome changes in design, does not differ greatly in structure from its predecessors. The information given in the body of the book will, therefore, be generally applicable to all models. Forward reference from the body of the book to the opening section is indicated by an asterisk in the text. While I have dealt with the electrical equipment sufficiently to cover maintenance, I have reluctantly to refer the reader for more adequate treatment to my book, Book of Ford Electrical Equipment. The subject in all its bearings is too extensive for discussion here. Chapter 13 deals with points of special interest to users of commercial Fords. I am always happy to answer questions arising out of this book if sent to me through Temple Press and accompanied by a stamped addressed envelope. I have this welcome opportunity of acknowledging my indebtedness to the Ford Company for permission to use some of their official illustrations and instructions. Signed, R.T. Nicholson. So it's interesting, in the days before email and such, if you wanted to speak to the author, you could send him a letter, but then you'd have to include a stamped self-addressed envelope if you wanted a reply. Now, there's a couple things you need to keep in mind as we go through this book together. This book is written in English, not American, so some of you may need some help with the vocabulary. We Canadians, being bilingual, can speak both English and American, so we can usually manage quite well. There are a number of terms used in this book that require translation for our American viewers. Here's a list of some that I noticed, and I'll just point out a couple. Bonnet, you've probably heard that before. That's what they're referring to, the hood of the car. Petrol, that's gasoline. An interesting one, they talk about the motor house, that's the garage. And mud guards, that's the fenders. So you get the idea. There's some words here you might not be familiar with, but I'm sure together we can manage. Also keep in mind, both left-hand and right-hand drive cars were sold to the UK in this period, so terms like driver's side, passenger side are ambiguous. And of course some of the drawings, some of the illustrations will show left-hand or right-hand drive cars. Let's take a look at a few of the adverts together. Right here on the first page is the Super Ford, 4-speed gearbox for Fords. Very similar to a Jumbo or something like that. Gives 2 more speeds, a free engine for easy start, and eliminates rattle and vibration. Many other promises here. More miles per gallon, more comfort, reduced maintenance expense, fewer overhauls. Wow, never heard of that one though, the Super Ford. On the left we see an ad for the Everest of Perfection in Ford Lubrication, Blackwell Oil Company. Now this one's interesting on the right. This is a damper system using friction discs for Ford by Sway Sorber. You owe it to yourself as an owner or driver of a Ford, passenger car, van, or tonner to get to know all about this greatest of all Ford fitments. Write for booklets and user opinions, or better still, a set on 30 days free trial. I wonder if I send in a request for a 30 days free trial, if they'd still honor that. Sankey steel wheels. Pressed steel wheels since 1908. Those would be pretty sweet, although I wonder if they're a lot heavier than the wood ones. Interesting. Single shell lubricating oil. We've got a quote here from the author of this book, Mr. R.T. Nicholson, on judging a brand of oil. Here, let me remind you that when you are trying to judge the value of an oil, it is not fair to slop it in to mix with the dirty old oil remaining in the crankcase, particularly if the old oil is of a different brand, as it usually is. Scavenge your engine as directed, and then pour in the new oil. Only thus can you give it a chance. Try that with single shell, and you shall see what you see. Interesting. So, I've never heard it referred to as single shell oil. Was that the name of the company in the old days? Single shell? Interesting. And here's a couple ads at the back of the book. The Stewart speedometer, A rare combination of utility with striking beauty of design and finish. And the Car's Life everlasting commutator for Ford engines. I've seen these before. They've got an eccentric that wobbles a ball bearing unit between each of the four contacts, so nothing is slipping on the surfaces relative to one another. Everything is just it's just wobbling around. I wonder how those work. I'd be a little afraid that you'd just squeeze oil between the contact surfaces and maybe not always get a good electrical contact, but it'd never wear out as long as you kept it lubricated. Very cool. Let me read for you Chapter 10 on winter storage. If you do lay up your car for the winter, better deflate the tires partially and jack up all four wheels. You needn't buy 4 jacks for the purpose. Get 3 substantial logs of wood of suitable height, flat at the bottom and preferably hollowed on the top side to take the axles as they're meant to support. Lift with the jack and slip the blocks under one by one. The jack itself will bear the 4th wheel. In place of logs, piles of bricks can be used, but should be crowned with cushions of rags to prevent abrasion. Let the water out of the radiator and the petrol out of the tank. If you occasionally warm the motor house so as to dry the air in the structure, you need not fear of rust. There is so little of the Ford to rust. Bright parts are best smeared with Vaseline. So this is interesting. They're suggesting that your nickel, chrome, and brass parts be smeared with Vaseline to prevent rust over the winter. In winter, however, there are often fine days that tempt us out onto the road, and I therefore do not recommend laying your car up for the winter. One precaution, however, you should take. Always empty your radiator when you come in, for you never know when a sharp frost is due, and if it freezes your radiator, it will probably split your water jackets or tubes. Even if you heat your motor house, this precaution is still advisable. For some time the fire may go out, or you may forget to light it, and then there may be trouble. It is an easy matter to refill the radiator. While it is by no means necessary that the motor house should be heated, it is desirable that it should be. In first cost, those slow combustion stoves that burn a patent fuel are cheapest, but the cost for fuel is relatively heavy. In the long run, an external stove with internal heating pipes is cheapest. You must, of course, not have any form of stove inside the motor house that involves a flame, especially if you leave any petrol in the tank. The fumes accumulate and are likely to explode in the presence of a naked flame. The slow combustion stoves mentioned are quite safe and they give no flame. It may here be stated that the gas companies supply safety gas radiators for the heating of motor houses. The small heaters, made on the principle of the miner's safety lamp, for use under the bonnet, are cheap and afford excellent protection against frost. So this is neat. He's suggesting a small heater like a miner's safety lamp that you put under the bonnet to protect the car from freezing up. I've never heard of that. I guess you'd put it under there and leave it burning. In cold weather, when the car is being regularly used, it is a good thing to run the engine quietly inside the house with the doors closed for a quarter of an hour at night before switching off. That will create an awful atmosphere, but the car doesn't mind that, and it will warm and dry the place. Then, if you're going out the next day, you needn't empty the radiator unless you fear a really sharp frost. Simply shroud the bonnet and radiator with old rugs. If you like, put a hot water bottle under the bonnet or some hot sandbags. So this is fascinating. So they're suggesting you come into your garage and run the car for 15 minutes to heat up the garage. I can't recommend that because of carbon monoxide. Oh my God, that'd be awful. Antifreeze mixtures for the radiator are more nuisance than they are worth. They cost a lot, and it is practically impossible to keep the proportions correct for long. So here they're saying don't bother with antifreeze. It says, what was the quote? It's impossible to keep the proportions correct for long. That's because you're constantly needing to add water when the radiator boils, so you'll be diluting your mixture. That's funny. If you have no heating system in the motor house, you ought occasionally to give it a thorough warming, either by running the engine when you bring the car in, as suggested above, or by keeping an oil stove alight for some hours when the car is out. Now the next chapter is fascinating as well. Chapter 11, Improvements and Accessories. He recommends a speedometer, a luggage carrier, spare tires, tire pressure gauge, vulcanizer, that's a tire tube repair kit. And this one's fascinating. Extra air. Let me read this for you. I'm a strong believer in an extra air attachment for any carburetor, and though the Ford carburetor with its adjustable spray orifice needs it perhaps less than others, even that is better for it. The extra air attachment is valuable, not only because it provides a perfect explosive mixture for the engine under all conditions, but because it makes it possible for you to run downhill against the best of all possible brakes, air compression in the cylinders. Moreover, it minimizes carbonization, first because of the perfect mixture it supplies to the engine, and secondly because it breaks the vacuum which would otherwise be produced in the combustion chamber by downhill running with closed throttle, the effect of which, without extra air, is to suck up oil past the piston rings. Such oil sucking is undoubtedly responsible for much of the carbonization of the Ford engine, for the oil thus sucked up gets burnt by subsequent firing and then becomes carbon. So, I don't know anything about this accessory called extra air. It sounds like a little motorized supercharger or something like that, belt-driven maybe, something that forces air into the carburetor. I don't know. I gotta look into that. The other fascinating thing here in his recommended section is things to take with you if you feel absolutely necessary when you're driving the car. Spare bulbs, assortment of nuts and bolts, springs and washers, and split pins, spare tire valve parts, fan belt, thick and thin copper wire, 2 or 3 yards of each, roll of insulating tape, extra sparking plug or two, and a coil unit. After reading Chapter 11, I was frustrated that I knew nothing about this extra air device, and I felt even more ignorant than usual. So I did a little digging, a little sleuthing, some research. I asked the fountain of knowledge, the inner tube, what the hell these things are. Seems they're just vacuum leaks on the intake of an engine. Well, there's a little bit more to it than that, I guess. Here, let me show you. Have you ever been driving along in your Model T and realized, hey, you know what would make this engine run better right now? A vacuum leak. Yes, something to lean this engine out, increase the temperatures of my combustion gases, and burn my exhaust valves. Yep, that's what I need. The genius inventors of the early 20th centuries are way ahead of us, and they've produced a device that can do exactly that. But I'm being a little disingenuous. What they invented is an extra air device. It's installed on or before the intake manifold to bleed air into the intake. In concept, they're all a valve of some type that lets air into the intake, bypassing the carburetor. They are basically controlled vacuum leaks. At cruise, this extra air leans the mixture, which was advertised as better fuel economy, cleaner plugs with less carbon, sometimes more power at speed. Used sensibly, they're just another way to do what your mixture knob already does. Used badly, for example, open them wide at full throttle, and you can lean out your engine dangerously and cook the valves. The most common of these gadgets was the carburetor. There's a great article in the Model T Torque magazine about this device. I'll put a link in the description if you want to read it. It seems to be a vacuum-operated check valve ball type valve that bleeds air into the manifold during high vacuum situations like idle or engine braking. Like most snake oil, this thing purports to end world hunger and solve world peace. From one of the adverts, and I quote, "The carburetor saves petrol and increases power. No more dirty plugs, no more carbon, no more valves to grind." Interestingly, the carburetor wanted to be held in higher esteem than ordinary extra air attachments. From one of their ads, the carburetor is not an extra air attachment in the ordinary sense. And here's another one called the Duo Evaporator. It seems to be quite similar. Some of these came with a dash-mounted control as well, so you can really interfere with Henry's engine. But I have not found a photo. This is a more conventional extra air device. The Linden Speedler. It is essentially a manually operated needle valve air bleed. So now you know. Would I recommend this book? Absolutely. It's got great detail, fascinating tips and tricks from the period, interesting language. It's great reading, and it's actually very useful when you're learning how to look after Model Ts. So yes, I would definitely and highly recommend the original Book of the Ford. This is Stephen from Flivver Channel. Thanks for watching this book review. Be sure to let me know in the comments if you want to see more of this particular book, and if you'd like to see more book reviews. I'd be more than happy to make more. I've got access to many different old motoring books that I think you'd all find very interesting. Thanks. Good night.